My dear fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, and friends in Jesus Christ, a woman had a friend who was deaf. One day, she asked her friend what she wanted for her birthday. Her friends made a strange request. She said, "Would you write Unlanders?" and asked her to reprint a prayer she has for deaf people. She printed it once before in her column, but I lost my copy of it. A woman wrote to Unlanders on 1st June, her friend's birthday, and reprinted the prayer in her column. A portion of it reads, "Oh God, the trouble about being deaf is that most people find deaf folks a nuisance. They sympathize with people who are blind and lame, but they get irritated and annoyed with the people who are deaf. And the result of this is that deaf people are apt to avoid company and get more and more shut in." William Barclay. That portion of the prayer points out something about deaf people that few of us realize. Most of us think that blindness is worse than deafness, but Helen Keller, who was blind and deaf, considered deafness a far greater handicap. When you can't hear, a lot of doors in the normal world slam shut. Turning on the radio is pointless. Watching television is bland and often boring. Conversing with someone is next to impossible. After a while, you feel lonely and abandoned. The story of the deaf person gives us a better appreciation of today's gospel. It gives us an insight into how the deaf and dumb man felt after Jesus healed him. For the first time in his life, he felt a part of life. This raises a question. Why did Jesus heal the deaf and dumb man? Why did he unplug his ears? Why did he restore his speech? One answer to that question is found in today's first reading, describing some of the signs that will take place when the Messiah comes. Isaiah says, "The deaf will hear, and those who cannot speak will shout for joy." By healing the deaf and dumb man, Jesus fulfills two of the signs that Isaiah says will help people recognize the Messiah. And so one of the purposes of today's healing is to add to the converging evidence that points to Jesus as the Messiah. But the healing of the deaf and dumb man also tells us something personal about Jesus. It tells us that he is a compassionate person. We see this especially in the way Jesus heals the man. Jesus takes him off away from the crowd. Deaf people are often embarrassed by their situation. They can't understand the simplest questions people ask them. They feel different and out of place. By taking the man away from the crowd, Jesus shows real compassion for him. He shows real sensitivity to his situation. And so, besides pointing to Jesus as the Messiah, the healing of the man points to Jesus as a compassionate person. Finally, the healing of the deaf mute is a source of hope for many people today, people like you and me. The deaf and dumb man's plight is not unlike our own plight. Many of us today are deaf and dumb, not physically but spiritually. What do we mean by that? An example will illustrate. Recently, a mother and father were visiting their daughter who was seriously ill in the hospital. As they drove away from the hospital, the mother began to cry. She said to her husband, "Ron, I don't know what's happening to me. 10 years ago, I would have been able to pray my heart out for our daughter. I would have been able to talk to God, tell me, don't worry, but I can't do that anymore. I can't pray any longer. I can't speak to God as I used to, and I can't hear God speak to me. It's a tough. I've suddenly become spiritually deaf and dumb." That story describes a situation that many of us can relate to. We too find it hard to pray as we used to. We too find it hard to speak to God. We find it hard to hear God speak to us. What can we do in this situation? We find the answer in today's gospel. We can do what the deaf and dumb man did. We can seek out Jesus, go off with him away from the crowd, and spend some time in his healing presence. Today's gospel is inviting us to give Jesus an opportunity to touch our tongue, to loosen it spiritually, and put his fingers in our ears and open them spiritually. More considerately, today's gospel is inviting us to do something many of us have lost the habit of doing. It's inviting us to set aside a few minutes for daily prayer to let Jesus do for us what he did for the deaf and dumb man. It's inviting us to let Jesus heal us of our deafness and dumbness. And so, the deaf and dumb man does three things. First, it reveals Jesus as long-awaited Messiah of Israel. Jesus does what Isaiah foretold the Messiah would do. He makes the ears of the deaf to hear and the tongue of the dumb to sing. Second, the story of the deaf and dumb man reveals Jesus as a compassionate person. Jesus takes the deaf and dumb man away from the crowd to heal him. He doesn't make a public display of him. Rather, he deals with him privately and personally. Finally, today's gospel reveals the solution to the problem that many of us experience today. We are unable to pray. We are unable to speak to God and to hear him speak to us in our heart. We are spiritually deaf and dumb. The solution to this vexing problem is to do what the deaf and dumb man did. It is to seek out Jesus and ask him to heal us. More considerately, it is to set aside a few minutes for daily prayer to give Jesus a chance to touch us, heal us, and make us whole once again. May the Lord bless each one of us. Amen.